Happy New Year. For my very first video of 2024, we'll be answering the question, are penetration tests required for the SOC 2? And the TLDR version of this video is no, they are not required. But if you want to know why that is and what that means for your organization, keep watching. And so to really answer this question, we're going to need to do a quick recap on what is really meant by requirements when it comes to the SOC 2. So where do the SOC 2 requirements come from? Well, the AICPA publishes a document called TSP Section 100, which contains the requirements. They're called Trust Services Criteria. And so ultimately, they say the purpose of the report is to evaluate whether controls were suitably designed and operated effectively to achieve the entity's objectives based on the Trust Services Criteria. In a nutshell, the only real requirements of the SOC 2 are to have controls that support the Trust Services Criteria. However, you may have heard that the SOC 2 report does not prescribe certain controls. In other words, different organizations might have different controls, and this is true. So to assist with the practical implementation, figuring out which controls to include or not, the AICPA put out something called the points of focus. So what are the points of focus? Well, if we read further in this document, it says they represent important characteristics of the criteria. As such, they may assist both management and the practitioner, the auditor, when they're evaluating whether controls were suitably designed and operated effectively, yada, yada, yada. But let's remember these points of focus are not requirements. They are authoritative guidance on how to implement controls. Now, one reason you may have heard that pen tests are required for SOC 2 is that up until 2022, the points of focus spoke about pen tests slightly differently. The previous version basically said this: management uses a variety of different types of ongoing and separate evaluations, including penetration testing. Even though it's a point of focus language, it does sound like required language, so there may have been some confusion there. So in the 2022 version, you'll remember this, a new version of the points of focus was released in 2022. They updated that guidance to say, depending on the entity's objectives, such risk and control evaluations may include penetration testing. So where does this leave us for the SOC 2? Is it required? No. Is it a good idea? Yes. So yeah, in plain business sense, should all businesses be getting a penetration test regardless? Yeah, short answer is yes. The Verizon data breach investigation report continues to report year after year that a majority of all data breaches were from smaller companies. If, as a company, you are storing or processing sensitive electronic data, most companies are, then the odds that you have something exposed, the odds are that you have something exposed that could allow an attacker easy access. And you need someone to think like an attacker to identify it. So will a reasonable SOC 2 auditor regard it as a control design gap if you don't regularly complete a pen test and remediate high-risk gaps? Most likely.